So, welcome to Don't Follow the Shepherd podcast. I have Kalen Olson with me from Oregon, the Bend area. I lived in the Portland area at one point. Kalen is very interesting. I love talking to these enlightened folks. I learn something new every time. Um, their perspective on the world is so different than your maybe run-of-the-mill human, but maybe that's a little judgmental. Why don't I let you introduce yourself? Tell us your story, how you got into this, and then I'll get into the kind of interview, if you will.
Okay, cool. Thanks. Do you like to go by Dr. Jordan or Jordan?
Oh, just Jordan. The
Okay, cool.
the title is for those with ridiculous, insecure, fragile egos, which I also have, but go ahead.
Okay, cool. Yeah, thanks for having me, Jordan. So, like you said, I grew up in Oregon, and we can go into a little bit later. But yeah, my background's in teaching, and I've segued into that into more of like a coaching, healer, guide, artist path where I guide women back home to themselves, essentially. So the world tells us, sometimes perhaps culture, family, we need to be a certain way, but I believe everybody has dormant gifts lying inside of them. And so I really support people in awakening those gifts to access just profound transformation in areas of love, relationships, career, and health.
One thing I read that you had shared in a media for a media outlet was that, there was something about it was poignant. Why would you didn't say it like this, but something about an MBA, like you don't need an MBA, you're just kind of do it through lived experience, building your business. Now, I don't mean to make it too businessy, but you are an authentic spiritual coach, but you also have run a business. So I thought that was fascinating insight, though, because I think it's true for anyone who's entrepreneurial.
Yeah, totally. I mean, spirituality is so interesting because there's so many different teachings. And for me, I had a challenge because there's a lot of real world stuff that I love. And I love the spirituality. So for me, getting to bridge the two feels like a most authentic path.
Another thing I gleaned from commentary was that as a teacher, um, you like to bring students into a circle formation. See, I was not such a great student, although I spent a lot of time in school. I would have probably thrived in your class. Instead, I was disassociating all the time, just zoning out. And, you know, the teachers don't need a lot of expensive tools. They just need to kind of engage the student with their own kind of resources. So, sorry, I'm jumping all over the place, but I'm so fascinated by some of the things that you've said in these in articles and elsewhere. Um, Maybe talk a little bit about how you utilize teaching in how your formal teaching experience helped you as a coach and a spiritual guide.
Yeah. So, gosh, you bring up a lot of interesting um, little nuggets that, like, for me, when I was in the classroom, I loved school as a kid. Like, and then I was a 90s kid. I loved education and I was excited to jump back in. And what I found when I entered the classroom is that this generation is so different. And the model, and maybe perhaps in the 90s, you could argue too, it didn't work for everybody, like you're saying for yourself. And um, so what I noticed and what I noticed myself fighting against was a linear upward model. And that's really also mirrored in our corporate culture in the United States, where it's like you got to be good enough, you got to work hard enough, and perhaps if you're lucky, you can climb this particular ladder. And that was existing in the classroom. And yet when we're all children, we're very used to like playing outside or we're fiddling with something and we're creating from our authentic gifts, for a lot of children. And so that model I was noticing wasn't available in the classroom, and I wasn't aware of it at the time. And so it caused a lot of frustration for me, and it caused a lot of frustration for the children because they weren't accessing their innate gifts. And so, through frustration, I've just always had a relentless spirit of, I'm going to just figure it out. I'm going to figure out something that works. And so, really, my dad ended up passing from leukemia while I was in the classroom. And that was like the first time I'd experienced surrender in my life. I had been like really a workaholic, really just tied to my worth and my job. And so I was, crying a lot for the first time since I was a kid. And so I had a lot of bottled upness. And I think, in my coaching practice, I really encourage people to feel their feelings. And so I was starting to access that for the first time in my classroom. And what I ended up having was it like broke me open to a profound amount of joy that I hadn't really experienced since I was a child. And through that, I started touching on that childlike joy of like, let's all create together. We're all equals. And if we are all equals, then I really need input from the students on how they want to learn. And that's it. That was touched on in grad school, but I didn't really see the model being played out. I was fortunate that I ended up the classroom I was in at the time had like 12 or 13 students. And so it was a nice playground to test that theory. And so I had the curriculum handy, and I would sit every day in circle and ask my students, how do you want to learn? And they knew right away. And they ended up creating groups and tables and drawing up these innate gifts. And I was the supporter of joy for these gifts to be unearthed. And so recognizing that, I noticed that I didn't feel burnt out anymore. I had so much energy, and I really decided, I was like, people need to know that there's a different way of how to really live. And so I wanted to bring that same enthusiasm into my coaching business and show people that you can tap into that inner state of joy to unlock perhaps a new perspective in your career you hadn't seen before because you were following the straight and narrow ladder. Or perhaps that same wisdom can be found in your health or in your relationships. And so I really support people on tapping into that wealth of energy that's available inside all of us.
Yeah, it's so interesting and somewhat sad in ways that, you know, aside from critical developmental stages, when students begin their journey in school in a didactic environment, if they have a learning style that doesn't fit the mainstream, they get a lot of negative reinforcement. It harms self-esteem. It's like, wow, if
Mhm.
only you tap into the right learning style,
Mhm.
all these kids could blossom. But unfortunately, like you said, kind of well, you didn't say a narrow few, but the ones who kind of are very built to climb that ladder in kind of a mainstream, through a mainstream lens, if you will, uh, they exceed or they excel, but then the others, that negative, that negative kind of feedback loop harms people who have all the potential in the world, and it's just kind of a shame. And then, as you said,
Mhm.
what I like about the fact that you were a teacher prior to going into coaching is being able to identify that people learn in different ways. I don't
Mhm.
think every coach out there, they're not necessarily ill-equipped, but it's beautiful to have someone who understands how people learn, because most people are conditioned to
Mhm.
deal with school as we know it traditionally, and you can kind of tease apart, how can this person learn, even maybe in a guided meditation. Maybe you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a good point of like, yeah, it's being with the dance of the unfoldment with somebody and recognizing like if something's not working, It's one of two things. One, they're not really living their passion, or two, their approach isn't authentic to them. And so I don't know. I can't tell you the science behind it, but the immense grief just opened me up to a tremendous amount of joy and really quieting the mind so that I can bring people into a space inside of themselves where instantly their mind silences and they're like, "Oh, I know the answer." Like, and it's based out of joy, it's based out of love, it's based out of abundance, and that just really thrills me.
Um, the other thing I think is a gift for people who are um, spiritually inclined and have worked on their traumas, etc., is that you can be present and mindful. Obviously, you need to be to do what you do. But I think of all the coaches out there who have great skill sets, but they can't always be mindful because that's not, they aren't conditioned to do that. They haven't worked enough on themselves, myself probably included in some ways. So your ability to kind of be present and listen to people is probably something you don't think about because it's so second nature to you. But not everyone who's out there coaching people and advising people can do that because they bring their baggage to the client, unfortunately. Uh, I mean, they don't do it intentionally, of course, but this is a beauty. Like to coach in anything, you have to be present and mindful. So some of these nuanced things are just kind of interesting to me. Can you talk about your in-home immersion program? Because I love the name of the 360 immersion program.
Yeah, it's really a lot of what we've been talking about that, like, when people want to go through transformation, often it impacts so many areas of our lives. And, a lot of people who I work with, sometimes they want one area, but sometimes it's like, let's really, go for it and step into this most authentic version. And so I like supporting people in really coming home to themselves. That's really what it's about. And um, we see the outer world and then we have an inner world of our emotions. And really, what I'm guiding people to is the idea that when you feel at home with you, your outer actually naturally transforms. And so in the West, we've been taught, well, if I create the outer really beautifully, then I'm going to feel good. But it's really the opposite. And so what I do is I guide people into that place inside themselves so that they can experience the miraculous and witness their gifts, witness their truest essence. And then naturally, um, the outer world, whether that's your home, whether that's your career, your health, does start to match that frequency, if you will. And bringing color, talking about what feels most authentic to them. Because often, too, like we've just adopted different strategies from culture or family. And so this is really an invitation to dive deep and really express yourself fully.
Um, you know, you live in Bend, right? I've lived in places like Alaska and upstate New York and internationally in South Asia, but now I live in LA. And although there is nature out here, it's a hustling, bustling, it's
Yeah.
probably your ability, like tell us a little bit about connecting with nature because I assume that's probably very important and integral to your work. Um, I kind of miss the remote stuff a bit, but I also like the big city. But I also realize the healing elements of being so close to nature. Maybe you could talk about that.
Yeah, totally. I think it's interesting because like there's so many different meditation paths or spiritual paths, if you will. I'm a huge proponent of combining embodiment with, going inside and like really celebrating the body and making sure that that's like central. And so for me, this is a high desert town, and so we've got 300 days of sunshine. So it is nice to definitely like go outside. I'll spend time going inward, but then like going outside, everything kind of is able to flush through and getting that movement in. Like I love walking, but I'll get out and paddleboard, spring and summer. And getting that movement in has been really helpful to integrate or like get a new idea or like it boosts the mood. There's been so much science around that. And so um, I notice that everything's integrating more when I can make sure that I get outside. And so, um, it's sometimes I'm better at it than others, but outside's always there and available. So it's like I can always try again and, try to get outside a little bit more. Sometimes it's like in the winter, I'm so cold, I need to like, force myself to put the coat on, but we've got a dog. So it's like, you make sure that you get it in. Even though it's a little bit trickier in the winter. Spring and summer, I'm out, almost every day, and I have, trails that I walk through. So there's like a forest. I think, really feeling connected in the forest. Everything's a lot more quiet. I think that's really amazing. And then I have walking trails around here where I'm still connected to the junipers and um, nature just holds a lot of wisdom. When you can be out walking and you're getting symbols or, nature's talking to you and it really boosts that rejuvenation.
Yeah, it's interesting. So many ancient cultures relied on so many of these um, landmarks, all these symbolic things, and yet we're really detached largely as a society, at least I could tell in LA. The last time someone even saw the sky, saw stellar cues or the moon, right? Like I don't mean to be too critical of it, but it's just we are
Yeah.
a little detached here. So that's interesting. Another thing I wanted to ask you, working particularly with women, it is it because I find a lot of spiritual guides who are women are working particularly with women. Is it because you're kind of you find that the patriarch has done enough damage that some of these people are particularly wounded, or is it just that what is it about working with women that is so inspiring to you?
It's funny you ask that because I actually am really impartial and I work with women just because women have approached me. So I don't know if perhaps maybe there's still a stigma with men and mental health where who are they going to reach out to? Do my services speak to them? Or perhaps there's more of like a therapist session that might speak to them more. So I'm curious myself, actually. And like I love men. I have a loving boyfriend. We've been together a long time. And I think it's so important for men to have access to their own like spiritual services or whatever. But I don't know. I think men sometimes have a more difficult time reaching out. But I would love to work with both men and women. It's just how it's happened so far.
Yeah, it's interesting to me because I have no problem admitting that I find like women are so much more nurturing. I don't want, God, I don't want to be judgmental. Women are nurturing. I don't
Yeah.
understand why men are not I do a bar class. Like, people would say that I'm pretty rustic, masculine, or maybe I think of myself as such. But I like go to a bar class. There's a lot of women in there. Certainly the only guy. Like it's just I don't know why the stigma persists so much these days, but maybe
Yeah.
I mean, it's just interesting to me. You know, women therapists or coaches, I think they're just nurturing, like, and they really explore relationships not that men don't, but it's just interesting to me. So sorry.
Totally. Yeah, it is. It is interesting. And I think too, like in the line of work I do, like the patriarchy is a huge topic of conversation, and it's something that's impacted everybody. So for me, I'm not like, only women or whatever. Um, the things I did in the classroom, those are more matriarchal type of style. And it was for everybody. It was for all the students.
One thing I told you earlier that I found fascinating was that you were in the Nutcracker and you were designated or cast as a black sheep
I
or
was.
black sheep role. And, I identify as a black sheep. So when you turned it into a positive spin, or you put a positive spin on it. I was like, wow, this is remarkable. Like, so maybe talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. Gosh, I was doing ballet as a child, and the big audition for the Nutcracker was coming up, and I hadn't ever been in a big production before. This was like the big one in our city, and I was really excited about it. But yeah, I hadn't been doing tons of ballet at that point. And I showed up to auditions and I had on a black leotard with like a black rose skirt and my black ballet slippers. I really like wanted the black ballet slippers for some reason. I can't remember why. And I looked around and everybody else was wearing all pink. And I was like, oh, but I was a little kid and I just like didn't really think, I wasn't in comparison like I was as a teenager. And so then the casting came out and they were like, you're the black sheep. And I don't know if it was the leotard I wore or they saw something in me. But I was actually really excited because I was the only black sheep in the play and I got to do some hilarious moves that made the audience crack up. And I just thought it was a blast. And I think that memory sticks with me because I hadn't gone through my teenage years yet, where you really start getting into comparison. So it was definitely like a formative, celebratory memory that I was able to like always draw from and just, yeah, celebrate, yeah, that different perspective of Black Sheep.
Right, right. Yeah, it's you gave me something to think about there. When when you work with clients, is there are most people pretty comfortable from the get-go, or is there a bit of fear in, the notion of transformation?
Yeah, it's funny. Nobody ever tells me they're nervous. And then afterward, they're like, I was nervous. And I'm like, oh, I had no idea. Um, but yeah, there is some nervousness, but it's like so safe. And so I think I also kind of prep people ahead of time, like this is what to expect, this is what we're gonna do. And they're committed to their results and their transformations. That's why they're showing up to really get through the nervousness and realize the results for themselves on the other side.
Well, the reason I mention it is because I attached, so from my attachment trauma history and some codependency, I am probably was probably very attached to some of my negative, beliefs, blah blah blah. So the idea, as positive as it is to make that transformation, for me, probably fearful to give up some of the things even though they weren't serving me. And that's kind of the context that I was meaning it in. And I find that interesting about, when I see others. Now I'm not in the space of or able to serve people the way you are, but I notice that in people not wanting to give up, let go.
Ah,
You know,
it's so relatable. Oops. Yeah, it's so relatable. Like that's all of us, I think. That's me included. That there's just like, am I going to be, who am I going to be? And there is that attachment to the old, even though it's like not always like loving. It's like that's what was been comfortable.
now you mentioned your relationship. Is your boyfriend pretty spiritually inclined? Like, or maybe you don't want to talk about that, but I would think it's interesting, like what you can bring to a relationship because of of being self-aware and enlightened. I mean, it, we hope for every relationship, maybe one partner at least is in that space, right? Or maybe that's wishful thinking.
Yeah, I love our relationship. We grow a lot together, and he brings elements that I get to, strengthen in myself, and then likewise, like we have like a beautiful mirroring, I think, in our relationship, and he has like a unique spirituality that's unique to him that I really appreciate. Like he loves going out and being in nature and like fishing a lot, like more wisdom, like almost like I would liken his spirituality more like Zen, like the streams and the river and kind of like that steady presence that he draws on a lot from nature. So we're like I think we have different like ways of getting there, but it's complementary, if that makes sense. His feels more masculine, I guess.
Yeah, can you talk, do you study kind of the divine masculine and divine feminine? Is that within your wheelhouse? Could you talk
Yeah,
about it from your perspective? I've talked to other people who are, very much knowledgeable about that.
yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. I've recently really found so much importance in it as a way for me to like structure my business and my life. And how I think about it is like the feminine is like the flow, the visioning, the creativity, the ideas. And then the masculine is the structure, like really holding the structure. And so, like, you think about money is like the flow, and then the structure is like, how is the money coming in? The bank account and whatever. And same thing in a business, like, what's your structure in your business? And for me, for a long time, like the masculine, I like really strengthened my masculine first in life. I did all the things, worked really hard in all the different jobs and had really strong structure there, but I didn't really have a little more of the feminine softness. And so then I went into like almost an overbalancing of that. And then now bringing them into equilibrium, I'm like, oh yeah, like you have the strong trunk, you have the strong roots. And because of that type of experience in yourself, then you can have like the beautiful flowers. That's like the delicateness. And both are really important and valid.
Wow, interesting. Oh, that's very helpful. I like that. Um, I want to have you back. There's so much to talk about on these topics. Um, how can people find you? Uh, maybe some of your latest offerings, what you like to share so people can connect.
Sure, yeah. So people can find me. I have a website and I'm most active also on Instagram right now. So my website is kalenolson.com. And then my Instagram is just Kalen Olson. So super easy to find me. And then my offering right now is the Sacred 360 Beauty Experience. So that's really like looking at how to completely transform any area of your life. And so we do a deep dive and recalibrate you for really like your soul's authentic essence and really actualizing your heart's desires in any area of your life.
How long is usually how long do you typically work an average, maybe a client, if you don't?
Yeah, like around I like one like an hour session is super common. A lot of people are we can clear a lot of density that would take like years of therapy just in an hour. And a lot of people are like, I wanted to focus on that area and I feel good and complete. Others, it's like can be a couple months of really digging into like perhaps relationships if they're because sometimes it's layers of an onion. Sometimes it's like I have this one thing in my life I just want to get clarity on and feel empowered. And then sometimes like I want to really dig into my relationships.
Cool. Well, thank you. This is so interesting. Definitely I want to keep in touch. God, I should go to Bend, Oregon. I love Bend, Oregon. It was so nice to have you on here. I appreciate you giving us your time, and I will definitely uh I'll get you the recording of this so you can share it as well. So thank you so much. Um,
Awesome. Thanks, Jordan.
you're welcome.